Rath here, coming in with Week 10's early slate, the college fantasy football, daily fantasy sports, FanDuel, DraftKings, strategy and advice. Just want to hook you guys up this morning. A little bit late, only because trying to get some information on the games this week, as it's critically important as we come down. So what we're going to do, like we always do, we're going to go over the spreadsheet, go over every matchup, go over the rankings, see what games we want to target, and then go into the players. And I'm actually going to give you a FanDuel lineup, which I think is a cash lineup that I think you can use. It's more of an exercise for me to show you, how to get these guys in and fit these guys in, and what a cash game lineup potentially could look like on FanDuel. So let's get into it. First things first. Critically important, you guys. Look, when we do the video, it's, research is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, going into Thursday. A lot changes from Thursday night to Saturday, 12 noon. And all I can tell you is that, if you were in our chat room on Saturday morning, there were a lot of different guys that I talked about that I was on versus Thursday night, because a lot of things changed. The Florida State situation changed. Nebraska's quarterback, Texas A&M quarterback, Purdue running back, like all this situations changed within a 48-hour period, to the point where a lot of players got very valuable information in our chat room from 10 a.m. until 12 noon on Saturday morning, which put them in the win column. So just be aware that a lot can change. When I say a lot, I mean 3 or 4 guys could potentially, become players that you can use in your lineups, and those 3 or 4 players could potentially then end up getting you the win. So that's really what we're talking about. Let's get into this week. And let's see here. We got right here. Here we go. All right, guys. Week 10, college football, college fantasy football, the early slate. I got these sorted by total, high to low. We got our favorite, we got our underdog, we got our lines, we got the games that we're going to focus on in green. Projected scores, we got our pace in here. That's going to be a good indication of where we want to go in terms of high-scoring game back and forth. What time, what site these games are on, and this is a very interesting week. A lot of games are actually left off. The early slate is pretty big. And so, a lot of games actually were not on either site. And then both sites have different slates. So very interesting, and it's something that we're going to talk about. We go over the differentials. We take a look at the matchups. Where do these teams rank offensively rushing, and where against their opponent, where does their opponent rank defensively rushing and passing? And then we go down the flip side. We kind of look for game script and matchups that we think we can exploit and matchups we want to avoid. Now, if you notice, and I have everything, kind of in colors here with the formatting, we're looking for greens. And if you notice, favorite rushing, a lot of them are in green. When we go high to low, we got favorites in green on the passing side. And also notice here, a lot of underdogs on the passing side. What's very interesting, and we see this almost every single week, hardly ever does an underdog have an advantage in the run game. Now, we do have some this week. We probably have about 4 games that we're going to look at. We'll sort those out. But, very interesting that we do have some underdog run potential plays this week. So let's get into it. Look, I think there's 4 games this week that you're really going to want to focus on. Of course, you're going to want to try to find value plays in the other matchups. But look, I think that there's 4 games that you absolutely really want to be focused on players from these games, because number one, the totals are very high. The lines are very low. So we're looking at high scoring back and forth games. And that's something that you want in fantasy, because you want your star players on the field. And we got high pace games as well. And the one game that we don't is Tulsa and Central Florida. And if you remember, when Houston played Central Florida, I was actually one of the guys that said I did not like Greg Ward that week. And everybody was on Greg Ward. And even though Central Florida stinks, they were able to kind of slow him down. And he had a bad game that week. And so, just And really where that kind of came into play for me was the pace. Is if you're paying up for a guy and, he's just not going to run as many plays as he normally does, he's not going to be able to produce and pay off the salary, especially at that high level. So that's something that I definitely look at. So let's get into it. Look, West Virginia, Texas Tech is a big game. The total is actually crossed over 80. The line is 8.5. This is actually a very big game for both teams. There's been talk that West Virginia's head coach is on the hot seat. Texas Tech typically doesn't play as well on the road. And so this is definitely going to be an opportunity where you can get some West Virginia guys in because they're pretty affordable. And, we see here we have a monster pace in this game. And so there's going to be a lot of points, obviously, both teams probably in the 40s. And huge differential here for West Virginia in the run game. So, Smallwood definitely jumps out to me as a big-time play this week because you get him at a really good price and you get him in a great matchup. And we used him before, and he paid off in huge, huge dividends early in the season. So I think Smallwood definitely jumps out to me. And then you look at the favorite, Texas Tech doesn't play defense at all. So West Virginia's offense is in play across the board. Over on the Texas Tech side, they do have a run differential. My concern is that they're not going to really be able to run. They're not going to want to run the ball. They're going to want to throw the ball because that's really where their edge is. West Virginia defense obviously is not great as well, but it is better than Texas Tech. Mahomes is probably going to want to be throwing quite a bit, especially if they're on the road as an underdog. So not as much on the Texas Tech run game as maybe some other people really looking at the air attack here. Big game here. Look, with the BCS rankings coming out, TCU was not ranked very high because their strength of schedule has not been good. Now they get Oklahoma State and they travel. Now TCU is only a 4.5 favorite. TCU here is a very interesting spot. They obviously this is a must-win game for TCU, but I think on the road here as a slight favorite, definitely Oklahoma State is somebody that you want to take a look at along with TCU. The pace is going to be high. It's going to be a high-scoring game. Oklahoma State's run D is not bad. Their pass D is okay. I think so. The TCU air attack is really where we're going to be focused. Now on the other side, I'm not in love with the Oklahoma State run game. We're mostly looking at the passing game. The quarterback situation is a little scary there. So I think that, you want a piece of the Oklahoma State air attack, but maybe not a piece of the quarterback, if that makes sense. Houston, Cincinnati, line is 8.73 total. Again, another high-paced game and somebody that you're going to want players on both sides of this game. Run differential. Houston's got a very strong run offense with Ward and Farrell. So anytime they go up against a team, they're going to definitely try to exploit that. Not in love with the Houston pass game so much here, only because it's good, but I like the run game more, and they are favored. And on the flip side, Houston's run defense has been pretty good. Their pass defense is really where you can exploit it. So look for the Cincinnati passing game to be in play. Washington State, Arizona State, gotta love this matchup. I think the over-under of 66.5 is probably low, and I can see this game definitely getting into the high 70s. Team pace is very high. Washington State, we know, is not going to run. They're going to want to throw. And then on the flip side, Washington State's run defense is not good. So it's going to be a very interesting kind of dynamic here where I think the Arizona State run game is in play, but they're also going to have to throw the ball to keep up with Washington State. So I think the Arizona State quarterback is in play as well in a tournament on DraftKings, not on FanDuel, and we'll talk about why. Tulsa has a high total, but again, they're going against Central Florida. I think Tulsa is somebody that you can look at for tournaments, their passing game. Dane Evans is a guy that will give you fits. I mean, he's just a guy that the Tulsa can put up 40 points and he can have a dud of a fantasy game. It's just how it kind of plays out. They do run the ball quite a bit. Their running back situation is still kind of up in the air in terms of who's playing, who's hurt. So for me, I'm not really on any of the Tulsa guys this week, but I definitely can understand if you want to get a piece of them in a tournament. Iowa, Indiana. Iowa's 7-point favorite. Indiana's defense is pretty bad, but and that really kind of plays into the pace. So Iowa, the Iowa offense is probably somewhat in play here. I could see Beathard as a guy. I don't have Beathard in my picks, but I think Beathard as a guy, as a second quarterback, possibly. Look, their passing offense isn't great, but Indiana's defense is so bad that maybe they can exploit it. Tough to really take anybody on the Indiana side outside of potentially taking a wide receiver. Tennessee, South Carolina. Tennessee is a huge favorite. I do like some players on the Tennessee side. South Carolina is playing, for this new coach, so they do have a little bit more juice. They play a very slow down game where Tennessee plays fast, so that's going to nick Tennessee a little bit. Love the Tennessee run game here. You see, 22nd ranked in the country against 112th ranked defense. So definitely, I see Tennessee just wanting to run the ball down their throat, and I think there's definitely opportunity there. Georgia, Kentucky. Georgia's about a 14-point favorite. And we see here Georgia loves to run, and that's why their pace is slow. And so Sonny Michel is a guy you potentially take a look at. He didn't make my list in the picks, but I could see Michel as being a guy potentially on, say, DraftKings, where you have two flexes, and he could potentially be a guy that you could want to get in there in a tournament. I would not use him in cash. Other than that, there's not a lot. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the rest of these matchups because we've got some higher spreads, some lower totals, and there's just not a lot there in the rest of these games. I love McCaffrey, Stanford going against Colorado because there's a huge edge in the run game. We see here they're ranked 17th in the country running the ball, whereas Colorado's defense is 103rd. So huge edge there in the run game. So that really kind of stands out for me. UCLA also has a pretty big edge on the run game as well. So that's going to mean Perkins is in play. But if you see here, the rest of these teams, these are teams where the totals are low, the defenses are pretty good, and I'm just not looking to take any guys from these. There might be a play or two here or there. We'll talk about Kelly from Mississippi potentially, but and maybe somebody for a couple guys from Wisconsin. But again, a lot of these games is the reason why they're not in green is because I'm really focused on those top 4 games and those top 8 teams, because that's really where the points are going to come from this week. And then we'll look at some of the other ones. As far as differentials go, we'll take a look at what else potentially could be out there. Is there any other opportunities that we can exploit in some of those lower games? Mississippi jumps up at the top. Mississippi pass game against Arkansas is something that you can exploit. And I think also the Wisconsin pass game, maybe not the quarterback, but I think the tight end and a wide receiver would be somebody that you can definitely take a look at. So again, we're not going crazy with some of these lower total games. And we see here on the run side, maybe there's an opportunity. Oregon State, no thanks. They're a 17-point underdog. Duke, I can somewhat maybe get why guys are on Thomas Sirk this week because North Carolina's run defense is a little bit vulnerable. But I just can't pay up for a guy like that. I just don't think there's a lot of value. I think here's where, I like the Arizona State run game in this game. I think DeMario Richards is a guy you're definitely going to want in your lineup. And then Texas Tech, even though they do have an edge, I don't know if they're going to be able to really run the ball that much in this game. I think it's going to be straight throw. So I think the guy that really sticks out for me is Arizona State running back DeMario Richards, and we'll talk about him. When we look on the other side, is there any opportunities in the passing game for underdogs? So we see here, kind of like 3 right at the top that we've talked about here: Texas Tech, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State. This particular group of teams, you're absolutely going to want to have players from these games because that's where the edges are. These teams are going to throw the ball. Their defenses aren't good. And outside of Houston is really going to want to run the ball. But again, huge passing, and you're definitely going to want quarterback, wide receivers from these games as well. So let's jump on over to the picks. I talk about quarterbacks. I think, I try to be real tight this week with quarterback is, for me, I think Ward, because he's coming off a couple bad games where he had some teams where he played some tougher defenses or teams that slow it down. Ward was a guy that was over 10K. Now you're getting him at a little bit of a discount and a pretty good matchup. So I don't have a problem going back to Ward. He's 9,500 on FanDuel. If you look at the grouping of quarterbacks, Boykin at 10-8. Look, Boykin's a stud. But 10-8's tough, man. When you pay 10-8 for a quarterback, it doesn't leave a lot of room left. But again, he's a guy that you could pretty much lock in for 35. So, he really is going to work in a stack where you can get some of the cheaper TCU wide receivers. That's really where he's going to come into play. He's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings. He's a $1,400 difference, whereas on Ward, you get about $1,100 difference. So that's why I put these guys in green. Mahomes has a great price on DraftKings. You can get him at $7,600. So I think he's absolutely in play over there. And then Falk is at $8,300. So again, better price over on DraftKings, where I think Ward is actually probably a little bit more of a value play. So when I say value play, I mean he's got better value over on FanDuel. When you play two quarterbacks, you got to it's really tough to take the number one guy unless you're dropping down and taking a really underrated guy or a great matchup. So I think you can squeeze in like Mahomes and Falk, on a site like DraftKings and be fine. Chad Kelly, Mississippi, he's not great, but he's got a good matchup. He's got a pretty good price. He's less than 8,000 on FanDuel. Excuse me. And so that's kind of key there. That kind of opens up some opportunities. I think that if you really want to use McCaffrey from Stanford at running back, then Kelly is a guy where you're going to be able to save about $1,600 off of Ward. And that's going to be the difference of, from where you're going to want to save. There's about an $1,800 difference between Demario Richard and Christian McCaffrey. So if you're going to go, we'll show you the example in the line. So, you go Richard, Ward. I think if you come back and you really want to use McCaffrey, I think that Kelly is a guy that you're going to want to use, or even Skylar Howard, who's at 7,700 with a great matchup. Mike Bercovici, I put in the salary for FanDuel only to give you basically the reference point is because he's not a play for me on FanDuel at all, not at 9,000. You're paying up for the recent game that he went nuts. Whereas on DraftKings, he's only at 7,300 and he's got a phenomenal matchup. So I think Bercovici for me is a phenomenal play on DraftKings as your second quarterback. If you want to roll in a tournament and you want to try to get in Boykin and Bercovici, or you want to stack the Washington State, Arizona State game, you can get Falk at 8,300 and Bercovici at 7,300. If you think this game is going to be 41-38 or even higher, that's kind of the direction that you can go. But I think Bercovici allows you, and even Howard allows you to kind of, open up your roster, whereas you're not going to be able to really get in a guy like Ward and Boykin on the same roster. That's going to be tough. Or like a Falk, a Ward. It's just tough. When you start going more than 15, 16,000 a quarterback, it just makes the rest of your lineup, kind of diluted to the point where you're leaving yourself not a lot of upside. At the running back spot, we talked about McCaffrey, pretty much a stud at this point. He's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings, but only 600. So again, with the thing about FanDuel is because the roster is different, you've only got one quarterback. You've got two running backs, no flexes. So basically what happens is, these positions are so much more valuable on FanDuel, where you have to play more conservative, I think, is because if you play on DraftKings, you've got 1 point PPR, you've got yardage bonuses, you've got two quarterbacks, you've got two flexes. I'm more willing to take chances on cheaper guys and upside guys on DraftKings than I am on FanDuel. I talked about that last week. When word came down that Jacques Patrick was not going to start for Florida State and everybody was jumping off the ledge and said they couldn't use him, I still stuck with him, and I told everybody I'm still using him in tournaments on DraftKings because at that price, in that roster, I still think that even if he lays an egg, that you're going to be able to overcome. And the upside was so huge that if he hit, that he was going to pay off in spades. And that's exactly what happened. He put up about a 45-point game. And if you had him, you probably won. So that was a situation where you've got to really take everything into consideration. And that was advice that I gave out on Twitter and advice I gave out in our chat room on Saturday morning. So again, those are things that, when news comes down, we want to be able to adjust and be able to move and see where we're going. Wendell Smallwood, he's only 6,700 on FanDuel, so I pretty much have him locked in on every single FanDuel lineup. Kenneth Farrow at 7,700, he's only 6,500 on DraftKings. I'm using Farrow in lineups where I'm not using Greg Ward. I'm figuring that one of these guys is going to get a bunch of rushing touchdowns, so you definitely want a piece of that. Jalen Hurd and Paul Perkins are not on the FanDuel slate, but they are on DraftKings. So Hurd at 6,300. Talked about that matchup. I think at 6,300, he's got some serious upside. And then Perkins at 6,900, more of a cash game play for me. He never really has a huge game, but he's always locked in for a certain number of carries. And it looks like he's back to being 100%. Demario Richard is on both sites. He's got a great matchup, and he's got a nice price on FanDuel at only $300 more than DraftKings. So, I talk about Smallwood and Richard. I think if you're using a top shelf quarterback, that Smallwood and Richard are the guys that I want to try to get in, and then I'll save at the wide receiver and the tight end position. So from the wide receiver perspective, Doxson at the top, obviously 9,300 on FanDuel, 8,300 on DraftKings. Doxson for me, look, you got to use him with Boykin. There's a no-brainer there. So you're stacking on TCU, and I think you got to use another TCU wide receiver. I tried to limit the number of picks that we gave out this week. So again, as a secondary play, you're going to want another piece of the TCU passing game. So just bear in mind, whether it's Turpin or whoever ends up being in this game, take a look at the pricing and where we think is going to be the most value. I'll probably give out, some more like secondary plays and value plays Saturday morning or in our forums. But for the video's sake, and we kind of want to stick to the top plays. Gabe Marks, Washington State. Look, he had a tough game against Stanford, so you get him at less than 8K on FanDuel, which is nice. He's been super cheap on DraftKings pretty much all year at 6,600, so he's an absolute play there. DeMarcus Ayers from Houston. Again, I like the run game more for Houston, but I do see a lot of scoring in this game. So Ayers is a guy. If I'm not going Ward and Farrow in a lineup, Ayers is a guy that I'd probably want to stick in, especially at 6,100 on DraftKings in a tournament where I'm maybe fading some of the other Houston guys, but I do want Ayers, figuring that he could have a big game, and he's a guy that gets all the looks. Laquan Treadville from Mississippi, pretty much been playing him, every single week since he started getting a lot more run. So somebody will say, hey, you misspelled Mississippi. So 8,400 on FanDuel. He's a little bit pricey for me on FanDuel. I don't like that 8,400 price tag, but I love the 6,700 price tag on DraftKings, so he's more of a play for me there. Shelton Gibson is in play on both sites. He's only 6,700 on FanDuel, 5,500 on DraftKings. Anytime that you can get a wide receiver that's in that 6 to 7K range, in a number one wide receiver in a premium matchup, that's really what I look for. So Gibson's, a top shelf play for me. Erickson from Wisconsin is definitely more of a cash game play. And that game is not on the DraftKings slate, so just be aware he's a FanDuel only play. But I like Erickson, especially in this matchup where Wisconsin's pass game is going to have more of an edge. He's their number one guy pretty much every week, and he's the one that gets a lot of the targets. Here's some more cheaper plays. Look, Simi Cobbs from Indiana has pretty much been their number one guy. He's super cheap. He's had a couple big games here. He's only 5,400 on FanDuel and 4K on DraftKings. So if you're paying up at running back and quarterback, he's a guy you're going to have to use and get in there. And I think you can feel pretty safe. Iowa's defense is pretty strong, but Cobbs has been getting play every single week, and they're going to have to throw, and Sudfield's pretty good. So while Indiana is, they could hang a little bit, I think Cobbs is a guy that he may not go nuts, but he is going to at least provide value where you can play some of these other guys. James Washington had a monster game last week. He's 6,600 on FanDuel. He's only 4,500 on DraftKings, so he's absolutely in play over there. And again, the matchup with TCU, it looks like he's kind of separated himself from the pack of Oklahoma State wide receivers. Shaq Washington from Cincinnati, we know that game is going to be high scoring, so we're going to want a piece of the air attack. 6,400 on FanDuel is a pretty good price, I think, and then he's 5,700 on DraftKings. And then tight end position, we know is FanDuel only. Fumagalli is pretty much a guy I've been using every week ever since he got the start nod. He's still only 3,100, so I'm going to continue to roll with him as my cheap tight end. If you've got $500 to $600 left over and you want to spend it, I think Leggett from Clemson and Hooper from Stanford are two guys that you can definitely move to. But again, I'd probably go more with them in a tournament than I would in a cash game. In a cash game for me, I just look to save at tight end. I think 3,100 for me is enough where I can upgrade and get a better wide receiver or a better running back and save $500 to $600. I'm just going to give you a quick potential FanDuel cash game lineup. I kind of just wanted to show you how the salaries would play out with these picks to see if we could make a lineup. I like Ward on FanDuel at 9,500. And I'm playing Ward naked. What that means is no running back, no wide receiver, no tight end from the team. So because Ward runs so much that I really don't stack him with anybody else. And Demario Richard, Arizona State, and Wendell Smallwood. Now, for me, these are the two guys that are in great matchups at great pricing that allow me to pay up on a guy like Ward. The $2,000 difference or the $1,800 or the $1,500 difference that I'm going to pay while I'm paying up for Ward versus a guy like Kelly or Howard, that's really the difference for me. If you want to go McCaffrey with Kelly or Howard, I can understand it. My problem with Howard is I'm not using Howard in cash because I'd only use him in stacks to West Virginia. So if I'm going Skylar Howard, I'm probably going to have Smallwood and I'm probably going to have Gibson as well. And I'm looking to mostly to do a West Virginia stack. And if I'm saving a little bit of money and I'm going Howard, then I think at the running back spot, I'd probably plug in a guy like McCaffrey with a West Virginia stack. And that's kind of the way I would play that. At the wide receiver position, I'm not looking to go super cheap, but I'm also not looking to pay up and go crazy. So that's why I've got Cobbs, Gibson, and Washington. I think these are #1 wide receivers in pretty good matchups at pretty good prices. When I'm playing cash games in college football, I'm looking at trying to find receivers that get targets. I'm not looking for the guys that get home run potential. I'm looking for the consistent targets every single week at good prices and good matchups. So I think Cobbs, Gibson, and Washington kind of give you that in a cash game. Now in a tournament, that's going to be a different story because you would see guys like Doxson and Marks and probably Treadwell in more tournament lineups for me. I'm going to spend up at wide receiver because the upside is there, but also the variance is there as well, where they could be more boom or bust. But again, in a tournament, I'm looking for the biggest potential lineup possible. And then Fumagalli at 3,100. So again, for me, this is kind of I'm going heavy at the quarterback position in the cash game. I'm looking for two pretty similarly priced running backs that have good matchups. And I'm going for great value at the wide receiver position for guys that are safe, not a lot of upside. But again, a guy like Gibson in that matchup could absolutely go nuts. These are guys that could easily all get 100 yards and 1 or 2 touchdowns. But again, I think the floors on all these guys are things like, 4 catches, 60 yards type of thing, where it may not be bringing me back the value that I need, 100%, but it opens up the rest of my lineup. So if a guy like Ward goes off for 35 or 40, or Richard or Smallwood go off for, say, a 25-point game, then that opens up the lineups to where the wide receiver position, I just kind of need that floor and get the safety. That's going to wrap it up for this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. And again, stay tuned Saturday morning in the chat room where we break down all the games and all the late breaking news. Thanks again.